Okay, so for me, the important thing is to understand what Paris is really all about, and it's three things. The first is that it's a commitment to try and limit the degree of global warming to well below 2 degrees. I think people still think 2 degrees would be an optimistic outcome. The second is that it's a mechanism for agreeing what each of the countries are going to commit to, these nationally determined commitments. And what it means for countries like the UK and the Netherlands for transport is essentially surface transport is zero emissions by 2050. But on top of that, what's important is that the climate science is about the total amount of carbon dioxide we can put into the atmosphere. So it's not just about what happens in 2050. It's about a fixed budget that we've got to achieve, and therefore a trajectory on the way. And I think what's not understood is that we have to act now, and we have to make a change and an impact every year on the way. And for every year that we don't do that, we're leaving a problem for our children and our grandchildren that we currently don't know how to solve. Yeah, I haven't seen a single credible policy pathway produced by anyone that doesn't say for the next 10 years in particular, we've got to reduce the amount that we travel, and we've got to have a massive shift in mode share. We've been studying disruptions for a decade now. The impacts are really quite varied across the economy and between different transport modes. So it's quite hard to just give you, like one answer. But I think what we have seen is big changes to the commute for the 50% of the population who've been able to work from home, and we're seeing that right across Europe. It's been great for walking and cycling as the roads have been quieter. People have been accessing more local facilities. It's been awful for public transport and also more recently for car sharing. Yes, our research over the last decade has shown that people are much more adaptable than our research models and our policy understandings typically allow for. So people can make bigger changes. What they tend to do is accelerate or intensify things that they did anyway. So those people who are working from home now, a lot of them will have done some working from home before. Those people who've taken up cycling have probably had some exposure to leisure cycling before, for example. So those trends get intensified and accelerated, but critically what matters, I think, is whether we try and lock that in or not. So do the institutions, do the workplaces, do the health providers continue to encourage those sorts of behaviours and re-engineer how they deliver their businesses, or do they say, once this is over, right, we want everyone back in the office? Yeah, my number one is sharing. So we've got lots of mobility moving around the system, but we use it terribly inefficiently. So average car occupancy in the UK is 1.6, and it's 1.2 in the commute in the peak period. We could fulfill a lot of people's mobility needs with fewer vehicles if they were more shared and more intensively used. So I think that's an on-demand system. Yep. It requires thinking about mobility hubs, where we need higher and lower capacity modes, how we connect them to bike and walk. And I think the second thing which I'd link to that is pricing reform. So electric vehicles, which we know are coming, are a fraction of the per mile cost of driving an internal combustion engine vehicle because of the taxation systems we've got. If we don't reform pricing, we're going to end up with a system where it's cheaper to drive, where there's less incentive to share, and so the incentives will be to drive more, and we'll end up undoing some of the cycle that we're in at the moment where people are looking to travel less. We cannot afford to lose sight of the fact that climate change is a binding constraint, and there's lots of really exciting choices that could be made, but there have to be choices within a world which is defined by these climate constraints. It is an emergency. And we have to treat it as such. And until we do, I think the possibility of just drifting along as we've done before is very real.